in affiliation with Boss Rush Games. Please visit Boss Rush Games and follow them at the links below to read reviews, hear podcasts, and for all things video game related. Boss Rush Games. Play games. Be better. Several months ago, I explored the first entry in Sega's groundbreaking Japanese RPG franchise, Phantasy Star, and today we'll be taking a close look at its equally as important sequel, which released in 1989 on the Genesis and Master System. Again, if you haven't watched that original video, I recommend doing so, as I talk more in depth about the series and explore its staples, which I won't go over as much here so as not to be redundant. And before we get started, if you haven't done so already, please consider hitting the subscribe button to stay notified of future videos. It really helps this channel out. Set approximately 1,000 years after the first game, Phantasy Star 2 has players take control of Rolf, a government agent working for the planet of Mota. You may remember Mota from the previous game, which was a vast desert back then. Since the original, humans have terraformed Mota into a planet much like Earth, with lush green fields and vibrant blue oceans. All this has been done with the aid of an incredible supercomputer, which the inhabitants call the Mother Brain. When the game begins, Rolf is called to the office of his commanding officer, who alerts Rolf that Mother Brain is behaving strangely, coinciding with the sudden increase of dangerous biomonsters that are emerging across the land. The commander tasks Rolf to investigate this peculiar phenomenon and bring things back to order. As one may expect though, this is just the tip of the galactic iceberg, and it doesn't take long for Rolf to become embroiled in a vile scheme that threatens the fate of the entire star system. Phantasy Star 2 is a game of many firsts. When it released in 1989, it was the largest console video game ever released, being the first to use a full 6 megabit cartridge. It was also the first RPG to be created and released on the Sega Genesis Master System. Though it didn't come to the United States until 1990, it still released 2 full months before the original Final Fantasy arrived on the NES in North America. The game is credited for pushing the concept of plot in video games. Like the original, it delivered a character-driven story that told a tighter narrative than its contemporaries, as well as not being afraid to dive into more serious themes than many gamers were accustomed to. It even had the guts to kill off a major character halfway through the adventure, and this was nearly 8 years before Aerith's infamous scene. Phantasy Star 2 also retains that old-school difficulty. The game was so challenging, in fact, that all copies ship with a strategy guide with detailed maps to aid the player through its numerous dungeons. Because of this, Phantasy Star 2 is often credited with popularizing the need for extensive strategy guides for role-playing games that largely continues today, albeit often digitally at the present. A major component of Phantasy Star 2 is its robust cast of characters. Most RPGs of this time period featured rather generic heroes and heroines, defined by their classes and rarely consisting of personalities. Phantasy Star 2's party members steal the show for a game of this time period. Each character that joins your squad has a motive for doing so, which makes them so much more enjoyable to have rather than someone that just tags along for no explainable reason. Your first companion is Nai, a hybrid creature that is a mixture of both human and biomonster cells, making her exceptionally strong, though an outcast from most of society. You're then joined by Rudolph, who goes by Rudo, a former soldier whose family was slaughtered by biomutants, and as such, he has sworn to aid in hunting down every last one. The bounty hunter Anna later reaches out to Rolf. She is a guardian, whose job it is to police rogue hunters and bring them to justice. Amy is the medic of the crew, trained in tending to their wounds caused by biomutants, and sees it as her duty to ensure the rest of the squad is safe from harm. Hugh is a scholar with vast knowledge of biomutants, and joins the investigation team with the goal of furthering his studies. Kane is an engineer with a bit of a criminal past. On the lam from galactic authorities, he signs up with Rolf as a means of a cover. Likewise, the last party member, Sure, is a crafty thief whose motives for aiding the investigation team are only to gain access to precious treasures unattainable otherwise. All characters have abilities and skills that match their personality, and while party members can equip anything, they perform much better with gear that they have an affinity for. Phantasy Star 2 does allow you to rename your party members like most other RPGs of the period, but I find it pretty hilarious how the characters ask if you'd rather call them something different after introducing themselves. It's like, you meet a guy named Tom in real life, and you say you'd prefer to call him Taco Farts instead, and he's just cool with it. Combat has been upgraded from the original, though it remains largely the same. Fans of the original will first notice that battles are no longer in first person, but viewed from over your party's shoulders. The number of enemies are also displayed accurately, so instead of just seeing a number indicating that you're fighting 3 beasts, you can actually see all 3 monsters on the screen. Players also choose which actions they want the party to perform at the beginning of a turn, and the characters will continue using that action until they no longer can, or they're interrupted. For example, you can order 1 or 2 party members to attack using a magic spell, while the others use basic weaponry, and they will all keep using that command until you tell them to stop. This makes battles flow a lot quicker and more easily, and helps prevent the player from choosing the same action over and over again like they typically would in other RPGs. I personally liked the idea, but often I'd forget to hit the button to change orders before the next turn began, so I wished that there was some indication of when a new round was starting. Another curious aspect that the game doesn't really explain to you is that the order in which the characters are arranged in your party is important, as those at the front will be more likely to be attacked by enemies, while those in the back have a greater chance to be ignored. This is a great way of keeping the weaker party members, in particular your healers, safe from harm's way. Not many RPGs at the time had a concept of front and rear lines, so this is yet another attribute that makes Phantasy Star 2 stand out from the crowd. Similar to battles, players no longer explore dungeons via the first-person mode either. Instead, it's a standard top-down view. This isn't a bad thing, but I quite liked how the first game pulled this off. Still, first-person exploring was pretty common at the time for RPGs. See Wizardry, Bard's Tale, Ultima, and many others. Phantasy Star 2 attempts to capitalize on the new view and upgraded technology of the Genesis by having many items in the foreground such as pipes, tree limbs, clouds, and more. It's a great way to create depth in an otherwise boring-looking locale, though in the 21st century these visuals are far less impressive than in 1989 and can actually be intrusive. Monster design is impressive, and I like how most of the creatures you encounter really do appear alien. You have some misshapen blobs, giant insects, and fantastical beasts that don't quite look like anything else you've encountered in an RPG. Of course, you do have a few bland ones, or those that are just plain weird. Like, I'm pretty sure that Catman isn't actually a man, but whatever. One knock against the game is a major drought of bosses. You don't encounter your first boss until close to the midway point, and afterwards you only face a small handful of others. These foes are tough, and will really push your party to their limits, thus making some of the most memorable battles in the game. Still, with the large amount of dungeons that you'll explore, I'd love to see more colossal challenges. A good boss fight is never anything to frown at. Phantasy Star 2 does have some strange bits that keep it from being a true masterpiece. For starters, you recruit new characters by returning to your home in the starting city after reaching certain plot points, which are mainly after arriving at a new city. The game, as far as I know, never instructs you that you can do this, and had I not been utilizing a guide, I probably never would have wandered back into my home, and instead struggled with the starting 2 characters for several hours. Dungeons, like with most early JRPGs, can be a tremendous pain. Much of their difficulty is in these numerous elevators, many of which lead to dead ends or traps. Memorization is key to making it out of these futuristic labyrinths unscathed. There are spells and items that you can use to warp instantly to the surface, so you can go to a town and heal and save. So coupled with the pack and strategy guides, they aren't too much of a pain, but still a daunting challenge nonetheless. Aside from the mazes and dungeons, there are several parts of the game where you just have no idea where to go. This perhaps is the greatest form of irritation, especially to those playing the game in the past with no access to the internet or the aforementioned guide. For instance, how was I supposed to know that I need to check this monitor to get a special key, or that I need to wander outside the bounds of this room to get to another secret room? It's not limited to the dungeons either, as towns often have homes that are required to visit, conveniently placed just outside the walls. Exploring is made even more frustrating due to the lack of a run button. These dungeons can be long, so walking about at a leisurely pace makes them drag even more so. Even trying to get from one side of a town to the other can be mildly irritating because you tread at such a crawl. Lastly, buying from shops can be burdensome. This is a frequent issue with games from the time period, and continued to be so for far longer than it really should. Any fans of the original Pokemon games would know exactly what I'm talking about. There are 3 different types of shops that you can visit, one each for consumable items, weapons, and defensive gear. You can only buy one item at a time, so when you're stocking up on consumables, it can be a real pain. When you're wanting new weapons or armor, there's no way to tell if the shop's wares are better or worse than what you already have until after you've bought it and equipped it to a character. You almost need to save the game first before shopping, so as not to risk wasting coin. And if you want to sell items, you must do it at the item shop, as the others don't give the option. These are all just little issues that make the game a bit tedious, although are far from making it unenjoyable. I played the original game via the phenomenal Sega Ages port on the Nintendo Switch. For convenience, I'm experiencing this one via the Sega Genesis Classics collection, currently available on Switch, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, Windows, Mac, and Linux. Thus, if you want to play it, then it's pretty much available anywhere you want. This is a great port, bundled together with over 50 other classic games such as Sonic the Hedgehog, Streets of Rage, and Golden Axe. One characteristic I like a lot is the home menu. It resembles the room of a serious gamer of the 90s, decked out with posters of their favorite games and an entertainment center complete with a retro CRT TV. To choose the game that you want to play, you go over to your shelf and pull it as if it's really there in your collection. That's really cool. Just as with most any modern day port, you have access to sharper graphics, filters that can give you a more retro feel, save states so that you can save anytime, anywhere, and options to both speed up and rewind gameplay. The speed up option was a godsend, as like I said earlier, there is no run button, so fast forwarding and short bursts helped make exploring much more tolerable. Fast forwarding also makes grinding a breeze. Just set up right outside of a town and speed through battles to your heart's content. And should you die, you can always rewind back a few seconds to make any necessary changes. Of course, these are all completely optional features. Purists can still enjoy the game completely unchanged. Having the option to do either satisfies everyone, I think, making this an excellent way to play the game. I do miss, however, some of the additions the Sega Ages port had made. The mini-map in the corner of the screen, while not necessary, helped alleviate a lot of the frustration of the maze-like dungeons. Also, not having the status of your party or the amount of money you're carrying readily available is a bit of a hassle, as the only way to view this outside of battle is to bring up the menu and view the party's status. These are small quality of life updates that can go a long way in increasing enjoyment, so it's hard not to miss their absence here. Before I finish, I have to talk about the music. Music in the Phantasy Star franchise continues to be a real treat. Tokuhiko Iwabo returns to compose the soundtrack. While songs can be repetitive, this is extremely common given the hardware and time period, and Awabo makes superb use of catchy melodies to deter away from the monotony of hearing the same song over and over again. It's the textbook way to designing music for the 8 and 16-bit eras. Phantasy Star 2 was revolutionary for its time. While RPGs have come a long, long way since 1989, it's hard not to recognize how influential this title has been to the genre. Booting it up, it's immediate that the game has aged, but there's still tons of fun to be had here, regardless if you're a retro gaming connoisseur or someone whose tastes remain in the modern era. Phantasy Star 2 is an easy recommendation for JRPG fans, and if you can snag it along with 50 other Sega classics, well then, this purchase is practically a no-brainer.